A lot of you know Mondays are my favorite days in comics because we get X-Men Monday from Adventures in Poor Taste, where they normally interview somebody from the X-Men office, and a lot of times they make themselves look like dumbasses. This Monday, they interviewed Steve Orlando, the new Marauders writer. Now, he didn't make himself look as stupid as Jordan White or Leah Williams or a couple of other writers, but he definitely makes the entire office look stupid and really accentuates a problem that is killing X-Men right now. There have been tons of rules and structure put in place by Jonathan Hickman, and they've all been ignored. There are no stakes in the X-Men comics anymore. There's only 3 laws guiding Krakoa. They don't adhere to any of them, and it's not going to get better anytime soon as long as they keep hiring dipshits like Steve Orlando and incorporating them into the X-Men office. You can't get better until you admit you have a problem, you identify the problem, and you fix it. That ain't happening anytime soon. So we did have this interview. There's only 3 question and answers that I'm going to cover here, but they really highlight a lot of the issues, not only with X-Men, but with Marvel themselves. So I'm going to cover those 3 questions, the answers. I'm going to give you my opinions, why this comes off as incredibly stupid, why this likely backs up a lot of your feelings about X-Men if you think it sucks right now, because it does, because none of these writers have a clue. They're breaking their own rules left and right, and they are just absolutely kidding themselves about why they're failing. Let's get to the very first question from Adventures in Poor Taste, then we'll talk about the answer from Steve Orlando. X-fans had concerns about Cassandra Nova cutting out Krakoa's organs. Isn't Cassandra breaking the 3rd law of Krakoa to respect the sacred land? This is what Steve Orlando had to say. She absolutely is. This wouldn't be the first time characters have broken Krakoan laws and dared someone to hold them accountable. For more on that, check out X-Men Green from Jerry Duggan. The circumstances differ, but the message is the same. Just because laws exist doesn't mean anyone follows them. And the decision of whether or not to hold them accountable speaks to both the fear and intimidation they engender and the perspective of those that might otherwise enforce the laws. Cassandra is one of the most feared people on Krakoa. She knows she's needed. She has Xavier's power along with many others she might have had. So yes, of course she's testing and daring others to say anything against her. The 3 laws of Krakoa are supposed to be the backbone of the entire civilization, the entire culture. I don't think citing X-Men Green by Jerry Duggan is a really good defense for not adhering to any of these things and not having any consequences for your characters in the story. X-Men Green is one of the grossest comic book stories we've read in the last 10 years. It's an absolute abomination on the part of Jerry Duggan and Jordan White that this thing ever came to print. I can't believe they're actually printing physical copies of this because it's supposed to be against hurting the environment, and they are literally chopping down trees and printing crap on it that no one will ever read. So I think they might have their priorities in a wrong place. But the fact that the 3 laws of Krakoa are supposed to be so important, they're the framework of all Krakoan civilization, and no one gives a shit, so especially the writers, lets you know just how much they bastardized and got away from the vision of Jonathan Hickman and why all this is failing. The fact that Nature Girl was able to just go out there and murder humans over a plastic bag and have no consequences is awful. The fact that you have Cassandra Nova, who it doesn't even make sense would ever be there. Why would a mutant ever trust Cassandra Nova after what the character's done? But let's not think about the history of the character and what they've done. The fact that she's on the island, she's literally removing organs from Krakoa, which I think it was weird. I don't think it was ever established that Krakoa had organs, but apparently it does. Let's just have the main characters ignore all these signs of why you can't trust Cassandra Nova in the first place. We know what she's done, how many mutants she's murdered. Let's bring her to the island. The first thing that she does is break one of the 3 cardinal rules of the entire civilization. Jonathan Hickman gave them the framework for an amazing story, an amazing universe for at least 3 or 4 years, and they've just shit on all of it. Not just Steve Orlando, Leah Williams, Tini Howard, Jerry Duggan, Ben Percy, none more so than Jordan White himself, the group editor. There's another question. This one gets my blood boiling, but let's get to it. If any mutant who dies during a failed rescue can be brought back to life, do the resurrection protocols at all take away from the stakes for a mutant rescue squad? What are your thoughts there? This is what Steve Orlando says. I don't think the stakes are removed, but they've changed. For example, we've already seen not every mutant wants resurrection. And beyond that, there's also the question of how recent their backup is, and the question of the resurrection queue, especially with the near countless mutants in the waiting room. Dying could still mean falling out of society for months or years for a mutant, and that's assuming the resurrection protocols last forever. which is a challenging assumption based on how often Krakoa is under threat. That's not even engaging the most basic of stakes. Just because a mutant can be resurrected doesn't mean dying isn't extremely painful, horrific, or traumatizing. It can be painful, it can be horrific, and it can be traumatizing, but the person would never remember it. You go to your backup. Come on, Steve Orlando. This is just so stupid. We talked about this, and this is one of the things I think that Jonathan Hickman got wrong, is there aren't any stakes. He tries to claim that the stakes are that they might not want resurrection. When have any of the main characters who have died said, I don't want to be resurrected, and then their wishes were listened to? And we've certainly never seen a storyline even approaching addressing it. I think it was brought up once or twice, but it was never actually explored at any length. As far as what's their latest backup, when have we seen this come in to play? Oh, your backups, 3 weeks out of date, you fell in love in the meantime, and you don't remember that you love her. The only time this has come even close is with Sync and Laura, X-23. And not shockingly, that was a Jonathan Hickman story where they went to the vault. But other than that, the lack of having a backup hasn't played into any of this. It's never been seen as a real deterrent or stakes for the characters as far as the stories go. And that other one he said was really stupid, the waiting room. When have they put any of these characters on the back burner? As soon as Logan dies, he's resurrected as Wolverine. As soon as Scott dies, he's resurrected as Cyclops. It happens literally the next page. None of these characters have ever had to sit in a queue or the waiting room. There are no stakes because the writers haven't found an interesting way to make stakes. Obviously, Jonathan Hickman was able to do it with the Sync Laura story as far as X-23 in the Vault. None of these writers have been able to create real stakes as far as death with any of these characters. The only other example really is Gorgon dying in Otherworld, and when he was resurrected, he had a different personality. They should have never resurrected him. That was stupid. But death means absolutely nothing in X-Men. It means nothing on Krakoa, and it's the fault of writers like Steve Orlando, Leah Williams, T.D. Howard, Jerry Duggan, Ben Percy, that they've had years now to figure this out and make it compelling that death could actually mean something, and it means nothing. How about we resurrect somebody that didn't actually die? Now we would have some kind of conflict in there. I don't know how they haven't explored that. It sounded like, at least initially, that there was two versions of Vulcan, one that was resurrected and one that got lost in space and they thought died. That would have been interesting. I imagine that's something that Jonathan Hickman was going to explore, but it got dropped by all these D-list talents, Steve Orlando being included in one of those. But I do find it laughable the ways that he's describing that you can create stakes within the Krakoan universe of X-Men, because none of them have really been used other than the one time with Jonathan Hickman, who shockingly was able to make it work since he was the architect of the whole thing. There are no stakes in the Krakoan era of X-Men. You know it, I know it, Steve Orlando knows it, he just doesn't want to admit it. This is the last question. This isn't really an X-Men problem. This is a self-insert problem. This goes bigger than X-Men, but it certainly includes it because Steve Orlando talks about his self-insert character. This is a Marvel problem. This is a DC problem that definitely needs to be addressed soonest. A reader asked Steve Orlando how Somnus's powers can be used offensively. Steve says, not every power is offensive in nature, but keep an eye on Somnus. There are already hints at the growing complexity of his gifts in issue 1, and it'll continue. Now that he's back, he's beginning to realize also that while he spent a lifetime in one night living and loving with Daken, he could use that time for all sorts of things. One night with anyone could be the key to new knowledge and skills. And from those skills, we could see his offensive capabilities grow. I absolutely hate self-insert characters, and Somnus is the second worst self-insert character in all of comic books, second only to T. Franklin's Peg Leg Beyonce from Harley Quinn Eat Bang Kill Tour. If you don't know who that is, I don't suggest you find out because it's part of one of the worst comic books I've ever read in my life. But Somnus is an absolute train wreck. This is this weird character whose power is that he can put dudes to sleep and then they can have sex for a lifetime together. And that's essentially what happened with Daken. It is really strange that he would create a new character and his power would be essentially to be able to roofie somebody for a lifetime. That's bordering on, I don't want to psychoanalyze anybody, but if you had a chance to create an X-Men with a power set, and the power set was to put people to sleep so you could have sexual intercourse with them while they're sleeping, like in their dreams and stuff, and make them fall in love with you, that is really creepy, exceptionally creepy. And there's other stuff about Somnus that really just not sit well with me. We got the one scene where he's sitting there in this banana hammock trying to make all the other boys in the comic notice him. It's just really strange stuff. The editors have got to take a stand and say, listen, You're a shitty writer to begin with. You're not doing any of these fucking self-insert characters. It worked out terribly for T. Franklin. It's worked out terribly for Steve Orlando. And almost always, unless you're fucking Warren Ellis, it works out terribly for you. They got to put a stop to this stuff. It's absolutely tragic. If you would like to know about Peg Leg Beyonce, and I'm going to tell you this up front, I did not come up with that name. It was actually a viewer that said that, and I felt pretty jealous that I didn't think of it myself because it was quite hilarious. I do have this review of T. Franklin's Eat, Bang, Kill tour that features Peg Leg Beyonce, T. Franklin's self-insert character. You got to see it to believe it. This is one of the worst comic books ever written, and definitely the worst self-insert character of all times.